Hello. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for Safeguarding Vital Systems, Nation-State Cyber Threats to U.S. Critical Infrastructure. You all can hop on stage. Moderating our panel today is Martin Matishak. Yep. Martin is the senior cybersecurity reporter for The Record. Prior to joining Recorded Future in 2021, he spent more than 5 years at Politico, where he covered digital and national security developments across Capitol Hill, the Pentagon, and the U.S. intelligence community. And before we turn it over to Martin, just a reminder that we are doing questions on note cards, so please write them down. Our interns will be walking around, and we will gather them. Over to you, Martin.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Good afternoon, everyone. So before I have my panel introduce themselves, two moderator prerogatives. One, please silence your cell phones. And then two, the first time I ever moderated a panel like this, someone passed out on stage. To be clear, it was not me. But if you see any of us looking green in the gills or acting strangely, please flag Peggy or me, and we'll escort them off the stage before they just fall on the floor. That said, we have an esteemed panel here today. And I'm just going to allow them to introduce themselves, say their title, give a little bit about yourself. Brevity, of course, is key, but take it away.
Okay, well, Martin, you made me a little nervous there, so I'm going to be taking deep breaths throughout this panel to make sure I stay conscious.
Not too deep.
Really happy to be here today. So I'm Dave Frederick, the Assistant Deputy Director for China at the National Security Agency.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Liesl Franz, and I'm Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Department of State for International Cyberspace Security.
And I'm Erin Joe. I'm in the Office of the CISO for Google Cloud.
Excellent. Everyone kept it really short. I really appreciate that. So we're just going to dive right into the questions. And of course, we're talking about cyber threats to U.S. critical infrastructure, something that has seized, I'd say, the entire nation's attention since last fall of 2023, is Volt Typhoon, the PRC-linked actor that seems to be pre-positioning critical infrastructure. Before getting ready for this panel, I was going to have the question of, is Volt Typhoon over? But then the invaluable Joseph Menn in the Washington Post yesterday had a story about how they've penetrated U.S. internet service providers. So I guess if you want to comment on the article, you can. But then, since Volt Typhoon is clearly not over, what does the future look like with this threat actor out there who seems to have no qualms about breaking what were sort of unspoken norms? From where you said, how does it look going forward?
Well, I'll start off. And so, would offer that it certainly isn't over. And I think looking at kind of strategic context on why China is conducting these operations is really important. So, Xi Jinping really sees the U.S. as a block to his goals for national rejuvenation and growth of kind of the PRC's power overall over the next couple of decades. And they have been determined to build a military capability that will enable China to deter the United States from getting involved in any kind of conflict in the Pacific, especially around Taiwan, and very, very focused on building a whole suite of capabilities to deter and if need be, defeat the United States. And so Volt Typhoon, these operations that target critical infrastructure, and there really is no kind of reasonable explanation besides pre-positioning for cyber attack purposes, is really part of a broader military strategy. And if you look at kind of PLA's, the writing in the People's Liberation Army, they highlight kind of the cyberspace domain and the information domain as some areas that they've got to achieve early advantage in order to kind of prevail against the United States. And so it's very concerning. I look at it as quite irresponsible if you think about kind of the norms of military operations and proportionality and necessity of targeting, because if they were to hit these water systems or transportation systems, it's going to affect a very large civilian population, not just military targets. And so something that we're watching very closely and working very closely with our colleagues in CISA and FBI and the private sector to counter. I guess on a positive note, their intent was to be stealthy and stay buried deep in these networks for a long time, and in that case, they failed. Right? Between the private sector threat intelligence work that's occurred and kind of the federal response to include with many of our allies around the country, around the world, we've been able to kind of root out these actors. We have a long ways to go, I think, to eradicate them from a lot of other networks, but it's on positive note, it has been discovered.
What's the view from state?
Well, I guess just to answer the first question, persistent means it's not over. From a stability context, we have strived to establish and continue to strive to maintain stability in cyberspace. And I think to your point about being irresponsible, it does sort of upset that notion of stability in cyberspace. And I think the point about it no longer being undercover or as stealthy as it was has been an opportunity for the State Department to engage in diplomatic efforts, not only to call out China for these activities, but also, and expose them, but also to work very closely with other governments to share our concerns, continue to broaden and deepen the coalition of countries that we work with to maintain cyber stability, and we can talk more about that when I talk about digital solidarity. But also to make them aware that this kind of thing could be or is likely also happening to them, and so they have a vested interest in taking steps on their end also to protect their critical infrastructure, because anything that happens in one part of the world can easily happen in other parts of the world. So that persistent access is part of the issue, but also the instability or vulnerabilities that are caused by it are of common global concern. So that outreach is something that we continue to do and work with our partners globally to address, both from a public voice standpoint and from a critical infrastructure protection standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Erin, what is your take on this?
Yeah, so I came in with Mandiant, who was acquired by Google Cloud. And from the Mandiant perspective, we've had a firsthand look to what both Typhoon and other threat actors are doing on networks and systems. And I think what we're seeing is how their tactics have evolved. So you think about what to expect, right? Evolving tactics, the use of botnets, for example, in order to obfuscate command and control. And the way that they're analyzing our behaviors, and they know how we operate, so they are going after paths of least resistance in addition to using the more sophisticated techniques. So the path of least resistance might be their attack on the SOHO networks, right? Small office, home office networks, which some, I think NSA and FBI and others have warned about. And so we are seeing that. They also look at how can they go after the one-to-many attack types, as do many of the other threat actors. So we see the reconnaissance against government and defense. We see them looking for US government and state government domains, right? So they're very active in all of these spaces and all these different ways to conduct attack types, and they're using technology as well as the vulnerabilities that we have in order to effectuate their attacks.
Mm-hmm. I want to follow up on something Liesl and Dave, you both mentioned. This was supposed to be stealthy. They were hoping not to be caught. They were hoping to pre-position and stay in the networks. They were found out. But even with this sort of outing of them, they're still at it. So if I can channel my inner Chicago for a minute, what's it going to take? Like, what's it going to take to make them stop?
Well, yeah, I don't think I have a good answer to that, to be candid. I mean, if you look at their strategic intentions, and that's kind of why earlier I was trying to put that context in place, they're trying to position themselves to have an asymmetric advantage in a crisis or conflict. And so if you look at kind of cost benefit from their point of view and just the breadth of targets in the United States and in our allies in terms of vulnerable networks, it would be, they're not going to be motivated to stop. So that's a hard part. How do you get them to kind of think about it? I do think, to my colleague from State Department's point, trying to get them to really accept some norms, start to behave in a more responsible manner is a key part of that effort to try to get them to kind of shape their operations, shape their behaviors in a way that's less threatening to the civilian population. But I think at a more strategic level, that's a tough sell to them. Mm-hmm.
How tough of a sell has it been to get them to accept norms?
Well, I think we have to think of norms in a sort of precise way. So first of all, I don't have the answer to the question either, but there are, there are many piece parts to trying to get at, I guess what we would call cyber deterrence. How to change the decision calculus of countries that are engaging in malicious cyber activities, including something like this. And we have increased the drumbeat of kinds of things we do with regard to that. Public attribution, once there has been adequate technical attribution and adequate confidence that we can make a public attribution, we do so in order to call out those state actors and hold them accountable. The other thing is there is a normative framework that has been established with regard to peacetime and below the threshold of the use of force. In the UN, we've spent over 20 years building that framework from a group of sort of key experts around the world, and then building into a more complete global framework, and it has been affirmed by all UN member states. It includes the applicability of international law to cyberspace. It includes 11 voluntary norms of responsible state behavior, and it includes the notion of building trust between countries through cyber confidence building measures, using an old diplomatic tool and applying it to cyberspace. Of the 11 norms, 3 are norms of restraint, and 8 are positive norms. None of them say that you shouldn't have persistent access. Now, some of them address some aspect of, all address stability in cyberspace. So if the issue is about causing instability, then you can at least use the framework and the increasing adherence and affirmation of it as a tool.
Mm-hmm. David, I'm going to come back to you. You're the first person in your role at NSA. You've been around for about 2 years now. How does your office think about China or any of the big 4 adversaries that are always out there and critical infrastructure? And what are you sort of doing on that threat? Like, how do you think about, how are you approaching it?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. So my role right now is exclusively focused on the PRC, and I think at the kind of highest level, kind of already hit on the strategic kind of perspective on that, but kind of digging in a bit more. So NSA's cybersecurity directorate. So I work very closely with both our foreign intelligence operational directorate and our cybersecurity directorate. In my role, our cybersecurity directorate's doing a lot of work in support of CISA and FBI, and with a lot of our allies to Lisa's point, to support public attribution, to support detection and mitigation of these cyber threats. And so, what we've been focused on is how can we take our deep knowledge of computer science, of cyberspace operations, and of the threat, and produce kind of actionable guidance. And so. Number of products that have come out, almost always joint with CISA and FBI and a number of our foreign partners, focused on detecting these, both Typhoon, the main actor that we're worried about for critical infrastructure threats, how to detect them in people's networks, organizations' networks, and so people refer to that as living off the land techniques, kind of what they're using. Aaron talked a bit about that already. So we published a number of products out to really help not only our main customer base, which is the federal government that operates national security systems and the defense industrial base, but really sharing that information so that the whole public can kind of benefit from best practices. And so even last week, did another report just came out on best practices for event logging, because to detect these advanced techniques that China's using on these networks where they're staying really quiet for long periods of time, you've got to have really good kind of event log management practices in place and some good anomaly detection. And so we just released that last week. It's out on our website. I'm sure it's on CISA's website and the Bureau's website as well. But really good joint work with our Five Eyes partners, especially with Australia, with Japan, Korea, Singapore, and the Netherlands. And so I think it's an interesting example of like whole of community, how the cybersecurity communities are really trying to work together to bring everybody's kind of unique information together to deal with these threats that really are a threat to multiple nations.
Mm-hmm. You kind of preempted a little bit my next question for you, which is, in this space, DHS, FBI, DOJ, they're the home team.
Yeah.
You're the away team. And I'm just wondering how you would rate the information sharing between those two sides compared to the past, and then also how you'd compare information sharing, again, as the away team, with the private sector here in the US. What would you rate? Give it a grade, give a number of 1 to 10, 10 being super awesome, great job, guys, to 1 being like, we're not great at this.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I also say ask Erin too in a minute here, because I'd love to hear her view on this, because she's seen it from various chairs. But yeah, I've worked in NSA a long time now, and I spent most of my career on the signals intelligence side, on the foreign intelligence side. And I switched to a job totally focused on cybersecurity back in 2016. Mm-hmm. And so my reference point is kind of 2016 to now. And I tell you, walking into that in 2016, at that point, Congress had felt kind of obligated to push the federal government and the private sector to share information better on cybersecurity, right? There was an Information Sharing Act in 2015. And so at the 2016 timeframe, we were really wrestling with how do we handle the transactional nature of sharing, and it was very focused on trying to share data sets and all that, which gets really hard, right? On the private sector side, there's a lot of lawyers that don't want the companies sharing their data with the federal government. And then for the intelligence community, we have a lot of sources and methods that we're worried about, and so how do you protect sources and methods while sharing? And so I'm very bullish on where the community has gone in terms of sharing, because now the joint advisories that I just mentioned is a great example of that. But our cybersecurity collaboration center at NSA, the work in CISA to kind of build the relationships with the industry, with the private sector side, and with the broader federal government, I think has been game-changing, especially focusing on analytic collaboration. So I think when the community got beyond, well, we'll just try to exchange large data sets and files, to really build a collaborative environment where your top threat analysts can just really get on a call, get on a chat group, and really work on the problem together. I think that was the tipping point that's enabled kind of the whole community effort that we're seeing really bear fruit now.
Mm-hmm. Erin, I see you nodding your head down there.
Yeah.
I think David teed you up perfectly, because that was the question I was going to ask you, is about how the threat of nation-state actors to critical infrastructure to private industry, how has that changed the dynamic in your time over at Google, and then when you were in government? How has it changed from, you put it whatever time frame you want, but how has it evolved, and is it in a good place now, or is there still work to do?
Yeah, no, I have a lot more confidence in where we are today and where we're going, not because I ever lacked confidence, but because it was hard, right? And it's been hard for a long time, and we've done a lot of work, and I had a long career in the FBI, and I'm no longer there. My disclaimers are, I'm not speaking for the FBI or in any official capacity, but just from a personal perspective and experience, I've seen 25 plus years of us maturing these processes, of working to not just get information where it needs to go, when it needs to get there, but setting up processes and systems and communication methods and cadences for communication so that we can have ongoing dialogue about the threats themselves, what's happening, and what can be done about it, what mitigation efforts are there, and how are we all operating toward that same end goal. From a personal perspective as well, I can say that not only did I have a career of working with the agencies represented here today and many, many others, but some of the best years of my entire career were working with these individuals sitting here today. And I say that because it's ditto. It's a commitment, right? And it's the commitment of the people in the organizations that have caused significant change over years, that now have turned from the information sharing now into true collaboration and more jointness. Being an active participant, not only on various government agencies, but also many, many organizations in the private sector as being part of the joint cyber defense collaborative, right? And the collaborative is different than just information sharing. It's the sharing of capabilities and what we're doing and how we're doing it, sharing where we are. So for example, when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was so much sharing, not only of the information that we were seeing, but also the capabilities that we could bring to bear in defense, from a defense capability. So then we learn and iterate and continue to improve. And I think some of that comes from the fact that we have worked together on this for years. And so we have developed an understanding and some muscle memory that we want to make sure that we're passing on to the next generations to come to continue to build on what we've been doing for 20 plus years.
Lisa, before turning to you, the muscle memory, institutional knowledge, is the next generation even better than you guys are?
I hope so. Yeah.
I mean, where you stand, or you hope they are, or they are?
Well, I think they are. I mean, we paved the way. But David, I'm so glad you mentioned the information sharing legislation, because 100 years ago in my previous life, I advocated for that. I would say lobbied for that for that legislation, and because I think for so many years, I think frustration about information sharing was palpable, right? Industry didn't want to share, government didn't want to share. And so they had to find a way to, rather than dictate or have punitive measures, rather set an enabling fashion for government and industry to share with each other, not just legislatively, but procedurally as well. So I think the many iterations of information sharing between government and private sector, sorry, I'm not speaking for state at the moment, just give it, but has been really important to moving from public-private partnership to public-private collaboration, as both have said. And I think, all things, nothing is perfect yet, but the systems have evolved and are better for doing that collaboration instead of having walls up between the two. From state's perspective, though, one of the things that is also important is being able to share information with our partners, and so that is a great demand, a constant drumbeat in sort of all the efforts that the State Department does with our role in addressing critical infrastructure. And that is awareness, back to working with countries to share the kinds of things that either we have been through or we think are important for critical infrastructure protection. Another great diplomatic tool is providing foreign assistance to countries that are eligible to receive it. And have great need for building up their cyber security, their cyber resilience, their critical infrastructure protection mechanisms. The other thing I would say is that another way we focus on critical infrastructure protection, cybersecurity, a key element of that is also in the other side of the things that we deal with regard to the PRC on tech competition. We are promoting a trusted digital ecosystem. We used to really think about it in terms of 5G, but we now think about it across up and down the technology stack. So I have said from sea to sky, some might say cables to cloud, but all alliteration is good. So think about the whole ecosystem and thinking about making sure that countries are utilizing trusted supply and trusted vendors. And what that means is vendors that are not subject to control by an authoritarian government, that doesn't respect the rule of law, that don't have checks and balances, such as independent judiciaries with due process procedures, and those that place limits on government access. So that's what we mean by trusted. And it's not just 5G networks anymore, it's really across the whole, up and down the whole stack.
One of my questions for you was going to be, as one of the newer kids on the block, how the Bureau is thinking about these sort of threats, but I think you just laid out great what you guys are doing on this and how you're addressing it. I want to get a little bit more specific, though. We met each other in May at RSA out in San Francisco, which all of you should attend to plug another conference. I don't know if that's gauche or not.
Wait, how many people go to RSA conference?
I see.
Really, only 3?
Wow. Okay.
I'm not going to plug for them, but I am surprised.
Me too.
Sorry, didn't mean to take your moderating over. Sorry, Martin.
But we met your boss, Ambassador Fick. He had a roundtable, and he recently returned from Beijing with Secretary Blinken. And he said that Volt Typhoon did come up and was it was conveyed this behavior is not acceptable to the U.S. That was back in May, or the trip was actually in April, I think it was. What has your bureau done on this topic since then? Because 4 months might not seem a lot like in diplomatic time, but to like us, it's a long time.
Yeah, sure. I think really just what I mentioned with regard to raising awareness. Well, first of all, calling them out. There was a pretty great hearing where colleagues from across the interagency basically laid that table out for us, and making a public attribution, and then going out and working with our partners to say, hey, this is something that's happening. Is it to us? Is it happening to you? Could very well be. So looking at it not from your own defensive and cyber defense and cyber resilience point of view, but if there is anything that we can do together to publicly call out the activity, call out the actor, and call out the need for cyber stability. So I'm going to say the wheels of diplomacy turn slowly, but we do have a very ambitious program of reaching out and engaging our counterparts on this.
This is going to be a panel question, so I'll start with you, David, and we'll work our way down the line. Before I turn to an audience question, what are some other, we've been talking about Volt Typhoon a lot. Like I said, it's really seized the nation's attention, especially those in national security and tech. But what are some other malicious actors, cyber actors, PRC actors that you're seeing beyond them? And are there any copycats out there? Are there any JV teams being like, we want to be the next Volt Typhoon that you're seeing out there in the wild?
So I'm not tracking any JV teams, but I do like that at least for Volt Typhoon we have a cool code name for it, because some of the if you follow cybersecurity threat actor code names, some of them are pretty odd. So I think it helps to have a catchy code name for Volt Typhoon. But yeah, to kind of highlight what we're focused on, we obviously are worried about every threat to U.S. national security systems and to our key allies. And so in addition to the People's Liberation Army, which has a very large, sophisticated cyber force, we're monitoring, watching the Ministry of State Security, Ministry of Public Security, and there's also a whole web of private sector kind of contractors that support these arms of the government. And so a couple of highlights I would point to, the MSS, very large capability there that is conducting worldwide operations. There's a recent private sector threat intel firm report that lays out pretty clearly kind of the breadth of their operations that are targeting pretty much numerous PRC allies and adversaries kind of worldwide. And so that's kind of a good sense of scale. And then there was a recent leak by a PRC private sector, a contractor company called Typhoon, that's really worth looking at as a good example, because I think it sheds some light as to the kind of ecosystem in China on how the private sector companies support cyberspace operations. They're actually conducting operations on behalf of the PLA and the MSS and the MPS. And so in the Typhoon leak, they kind of, that information laid out that they were working for all three parts of the government, and they were targeting everything from Taiwan, no surprise there, but also targeting entities in Thailand, Mongolia, Malaysia, and France. And so pretty broad set of targets, lots of customers within the PRC government. So that's kind of a broad look at kind of the concerns we have. It's certainly not just about Volt Typhoon. The scope and scale of the China cyber threat is just tremendous.
Lisa, any other actors out there keeping you up at night?
Well, I would look at it more adversaries around the world rather than individual actors within any particular country. So I leave that to you. We basically follow the four threat actors, state threat actors, PRC certainly, but Russia, Iran and DPRK and non-state criminal actors and things like that as well. There are basically 4 lines of effort that we engage in to address that. Again, thinking of it in terms of the wheels of diplomacy. But one, as I've already mentioned, is the holding state actors accountable through the coordinated attributions that we've done. And this is one thing I should have mentioned, that the public attributions that we do, it's great that we as the United States do it and often do it at a very high level, but it is also important that we do it with other countries who are also calling out the behavior, supporting our attributions. We're supporting their attributions. And it broadens the defense surface, shall we say, of the countries that that might be engaging in this activity to hopefully think twice about doing anything about these public attributions. But things along the lines of the Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities, the Russian activity against Viasat, and of course the Iranian activity against Albania. The second thing is, we already talked about sharing information to increase shared understanding of cyber threats. So we regularly do share that with our international counterparts in whole of government dialogues. We've started doing sort of technical exchanges more often and providing, to the extent that we can, information that we think will be of value in that for that country. We do coordinate on disruption and cost imposition actions to counter adversary cyber activities. And one of the key examples of that is our work with the ROK in a joint advisory we did on DPRK spear phishing, and briefed the DPRK watch community about that. Now, granted, the DPRK efforts can be much more robust and much more public, perhaps, than others can be because of the multifaceted nature of relationships with countries, but it is a key element for us. And then lastly, I already talked about foreign assistance, and providing cybersecurity capacity building is a key way that we do try to train and equip other governments to develop the technical skills, the organizational mechanisms to really be able to, in a concerted way, defend themselves.
Aaron.
Yeah, I think this is a critical question because too often we look at things in silos. And when you really step back and you start to think about what are the adversaries doing in a much more holistic way, you start to see the level of capability and determination that they have against us to advance their own interests. Like Dave was saying, and to advance their strategic objectives, which are to be a world power. Like, just make no mistake about it, right? Let's just say that's what they've openly and publicly said that they want to do and what they want to be. So anything that they can do to advance that, they're doing. I can't think of a sector in the critical infrastructure that China specifically hasn't been targeting and attacking with success. And then if you think about the advancement of their capabilities, in just even a relatively short amount of time, we've seen them change. So for example, early on, most of us who had been watching the threat actors saw them using fairly low-level means, passive least resistance, somewhat noisy, taking a lot of data and then sorting it out later, not really focused or strategic in how they were conducting their attacks, to now being highly sophisticated, having capabilities to not only go after some of the, quote, softer, easier targets, but now being one of the biggest users of zero-day vulnerabilities that there are and exploits out there. So, and we remember, not that many years ago when we thought 5 zero-day exploits in 1 year were a lot. Last year, there were over 90 that Mandiant saw. So these numbers are huge. And that's just zero-day exploits. That's not taking into account all the other attack types. And it's just been in our career time, we've shifted from talking about general cyber hygiene and trying to get everybody to at least achieve a minimum baseline there, to now we're saying the very things that we've been advising you to use for security are the exact targets of China and other hostile nation state actors. So if you think about it, just even recently, China alone, the attacks include Fortinet, right, the firewalls, VMware and Pulse Secure virtualization, Citrix application controller, the Barracuda, right? The Barracuda ESG was a huge example of the shift in attack types from China. There we saw what I've called, at least, a real shift from incident response being not just a game of cat and mouse where you find them in your system and now you're going to chase them out, to really being a game of chess where they have studied our moves, they've studied our responses, they anticipate what we're going to do, and they are positioned for that, and they respond to that. And we actually saw them changing their tactics when they saw the investigation start. We saw them deleting malware, we saw them putting things out there to throw off investigations. And then they knew that part of our response would include sending out clean hardware and software. So what do? They hide the back door in the configuration files so that as those clean software and hardware are installed, you do nothing more than reinstall a backdoor for China. These are incredibly sophisticated tactics that have come to play in a pretty short time and increase the risk to everybody, because these are the things you use for security. Right? We're not talking about, oh, you're just in a certain business and therefore you're a higher target. We're talking about anybody who's using these kinds of appliances for security is at risk. Very different situation today.
Yeah, I noticed you nodding vigorously throughout most of this.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so a couple points to kind of weave us together. First, what I think we can help with is shedding light on kind of broader tradecraft. And a good example of that, there's a kind of a case study based product that we developed with the Australians, CISA, FBI, and a number of other foreign partners, I think back in May, looking at the Ministry of State Security. So it's kind of a lay down of tradecraft, right? So it's not focused on every tactic and technique they're going to use, but really a good lay down of how the Ministry of State Security conducts their cyber operations and what to look for. And so I think those kind of products help steer cybersecurity programs, and it also reinforces the importance of cyber diplomacy, because I look back at 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago, the idea that you would have all these partners around the globe signing up to publicly out a PRC threat actor, it's a major shift. And especially if you look at some of the states that have suffered significant economic coercion by China, right? So they haven't used that tool on the United States very much because the interdependencies are so great, and the risk to them would be so great if we retaliated. But a number of our partners around the world have really suffered from economic pressure by the PRC, and a number of those states are signing up, thanks to the hard work that the State Department and others have done to kind of build these relationships internationally.
Yeah, I really want to take a second and highlight the value of the attribution and the outing, right? You've both mentioned it several times, and I think that sometimes there can be some public misunderstanding or frustration about what's the point, right? And the point is, not only do we have the confidence in that attribution, but we're showing that we are demonstrating that we have the capability to identify the threat actors, particularly down to the ones on the keyboard sitting in China. That is a very different capability that we're saying we bring to the table collectively, right? So whether it's the private sector that conducted an incident response and is sharing that information now, or whether it's the government that discovered it and is now disclosing it, but we're saying collectively we are working together and providing information that then can go into the issuance of sanctions or the issuance of law enforcement activity against the threat actors or against diplomatic actions that can be taken. So there are a lot of different levers that can then be pulled once we've collectively provided information that can be used for that attribution, because when you have confidence in the attribution, you can then take more decisive action.
And I think if I could just add, Martin, to that, because that was exactly the thought calculus and the deliberation that we go through. The other piece of it, before we, there was a whole period of time where we did not publicly attribute cyber activity, malicious cyber activity to another country. And part of that was our own relative immaturity and maybe confidence issues, but it was also due to an uncertainty about how that would affect our relationship with said country. So like I said, DPRK might be a little easier. As David pointed out, China is a lot more difficult to think about how that might have any cascading effects on the relationship. And I think what the public attributions that we've been doing mean is that to these countries, to the point that it's important, is that it is important enough to us for our top level leaders to be raising this as a concern, even in what might be a complicated and entangled relationship with many aspects to it. This is now one of the key aspects of that relationship. And that, I think, is also a major shift over the last few years.
So after this shift, this is an audience question, because I think we've talked about some of the actors that are out there, some of the ways things have evolved. But we're here on this panel about critical infrastructure. This is what I thought was a good question. Which aspects of critical infrastructure are most at risk, in your opinion? Electricity, election infrastructure, water? 10-word answer.
I would offer the sector I'm the most worried about is water. And I offer that up for two reasons. Number one, the PRC is, purposely targeted water systems. It has a dramatic effect on the civilian population. And when you look at kind of the financial realities of utilities, the water supply that often are local government run, and they just don't have as much resources available to them to build the depth they need and their cybersecurity capabilities to protect. And so I think it's an area that we've really got to, on the federal and state and local side, really work closely together. But that's, if I had to choose one, that would be the one I'm the most worried about.
I'm not going to choose one. There's 16, I think.
Aaron?
I mean, I agree. I think it's hard to choose. The only comment is just as a human being making a human observation. We've lived without many of those things for many, 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 many years. But humans can't live without water. Right? So it's just a human observation.
So I have to ask an AI question, or else people start throwing tomatoes. I appreciate everyone holding off. Really appreciate it. I forgot my umbrella at home because it's so hot outside. So, going back to both Typhoon, top of the conversation, I mean, that was, according to Rob Joyce, formerly of NSA, that was detected in part through AI. They just realized that these logins don't exactly look right. That went to someone looked at it like, these aren't right. Both Typhoon is outed. How are your organizations thinking about AI in terms of defense and security? And if you can offer any insight on this from where you sit, what's your take on where China is on using AI offensively against your organizations? I think I'll start with you, David, on this.
Okay. I'll start with the second question on the China piece. And I think, again, this is a case where you've got to look a little more broadly at their operations. And so China's got a concept in their military doctrine, and it's kind of a mouthful in English, but it's intelligentized warfare. So they've got to focus on trying to automate and build in kind of autonomous capabilities in all their military platforms, right? So I kind of look at that as what they're doing in cyberspace and how they're trying to use AI for both cyberspace operations and malign influence operations. It's kind of an extension, really a broader doctrine that they've established to try to automate, and really get inside the decision loop in military operations. And so, they're going to use AI for offense, just like we're going to use it for defense, which is about scaling and automating and accelerating capabilities. We're tracking private sector reporting of China already using AI for malign influence operations. And so there is one particular malign influence actor that's affiliated with China that has conducted operations both trying to affect the Taiwan election and also sow mistrust about the U.S. government within the U.S. population. And so last year, there was a train derailment in Kentucky, and this actor picked up that story and started sending these amplifying messages out that kind of claimed a government cover-up, throwing out all these conspiracy theories out there, and trying to relate it to basically just try to get a message out to, for folks not to trust the U.S. government. And so the same actor then later, on the day of Taiwan's recent national election, created a AI-generated audio file of Terry Goh, who's the Foxconn CEO and had previously been running in the election, making it look like he was endorsing another candidate in the election. And so same actor, two very different targets, very concerning. And so, it's been really good to see the private sector community that's kind of managing social media share that kind of information, because it helps us understand kind of what to expect in the environment.
Lisa?
Well, I guess I'll start by saying that, Secretary Blinken spoke last year at the Artificial Intelligence for Accelerating Progress on Sustainable Development Goals event in New York City. It's a very State Department thing to say. But there he emphasized the need for the U.S. to lead in applied AI to safeguard national security, and I think that's exactly to David's point. From the State Department, I look at it both how we as a organization can or should be using it for our own productivity and our own progress, but also how we can work with our international counterparts to set principles for the development, deployment, and leveraging of emerging technology. I know AI is not that emerging, but we do call it that. But also looking at it from the promise that it has and the risks that come along with it, just like sort of all aspects of technological innovation. And one thing that we do try to talk about a lot, and I would encourage those of you working in this space to if you're thinking about it like this, talk about it more. Not only the security of AI, but AI for cybersecurity. How can we tell that story better? Because that is what our countries that we are working with, even our closest partners, are very, very concerned about AI. So how can we use it to our collective national defense and cyber stability?
Aaron.
Yeah, so at Google Cloud, we think our mission is secure the cloud, secure the customer, secure the planet. And we own and operate a large global infrastructure and the largest zero trust infrastructure on the planet. We think of things at scale that very few people think about. Everything we think about is planetary level. And if we provide services to government that are critical, mission critical. We provide capabilities to the warfighter. We provide capabilities to customers in government who are interacting and taking in documents that are very sensitive, communications that are very sensitive, that are necessary for our functioning as a nation. So we're providing those services in addition to being one that provides critical communications. You think about not only Gmail, when we have 2.5 billion users every day who rely on that form of communication, and we also are providing those communication methods as continuity of operations for some government activities, but then also Pixel and others that we're responsible for. We secure all of Alphabet's holdings. We have over 10 companies that we're securing with over 1 billion users each every day. So when you think about securing the critical infrastructure, we're doing that for our customers, but almost 30 to 35% of all the internet traffic runs on our fiber that we own. So we are critical infrastructure in addition to being a provider of critical infrastructure. So from that perspective, we look at all the multiple layers, right, of defense in depth at every stage and every phase, everything from the physical security of the data centers and the cables undersea and on land and all the things that we think about from the physical perspective to not only using encryption for data at rest and in transit, but then also employing post-quantum encryption. And then also taking our knowledge and experience and sharing that with others, like working with NIST on standards for post-quantum encryption and standards, as well as for a wide variety of AI capabilities and standards that we're a part of. But then we're taking that and saying, okay, we've developed a way to use AI internally, which we have for a very long time. We are at our heart an AI company. That's how we started. Search is just the way we did it. So we've been an AI company from inception. We've been using and training models to effectively not only get information to you and organize the world's information and bring it to you in a usable manner, but also securing that large network and infrastructure that I talked about. We have the capabilities where we are analyzing about 2.5 exabytes of security-only data a month. Those are very large numbers that most people don't deal with, but we've been able to do it because of our AI capabilities. We have like 13,000 doctorate level data scientists alone at Google. So we are not only able to provide, and that doesn't even include all the other engineers and types of PhD engineers that we're employing. So we're able to take what we are doing to provide that high level of security across our infrastructure and to our customers, and then leverage that to share it with the world. That's part of protecting the planet. So ways that we do that are, we launched the Coalition for Secure AI that many organizations who are probably in attendance today are part of. We founded the Frontier Model Forum to advance security for AI. We were part of initiating the AI Cyber Defense Initiative, which also perfectly postured us to be the first to sign the Cyber AI Initiative for Security from CISA as well, who was also taking a leadership role in this area. So the goal here is to look at all the wide variety of ways that we can share that experience that we bring to the table and also learn from others, right? We're learning in that environment the best practices as well as the challenges of others and bringing the world's biggest challenges to the table and trying to solve some of those. We publish. We're one of the top 5 publishers of AI research cited materials ahead of even Stanford and MIT. So we're highly active in leaning into this, working with NIST and others on standards and trying to make the entire ecosystem better so that we are protecting the critical infrastructure that we're providing services to. We're providing that information to others so that they can better protect themselves and then bring that security to the planet.
David, I noticed you nodding again. Keep everything on your sleeve. So I got to ask you to weigh in on this.
Well, I think I would follow up on Aaron's point. I think you're probably tracking. We stood up an AI security center at NSA last year. So, and kind of for similar reasons that Aaron brought up, kind of looked at that generative AI just has outstripped kind of the acceleration of that technology and deployment of it, kind of outstripped kind of the understanding of how to secure large AI models. And so we've got a new entity in our cybersecurity collaboration center that's formed with some of our researchers from our research directorate that have deep roots in the science of security, and then our cybersecurity kind of practitioners. And so that team's focused on understanding best practices, developing best practices for AI security, starting to work on a number of initiatives to kind of really push the research forward in that space. And so I think you'll be seeing, we've got one product already out, one deliverables already out on the net, but you'll see more coming up from that group in the next year, trying to share what we've learned about security of AI and how to secure these large systems.
Publicly learn.
Yes, absolutely, publicly. Yeah, we have one, again, on the NSA.gov website, you can find it, put out an initial guideline focus on how to securely deploy AI systems. So if you're integrating an AI system, what are the kind of cybersecurity principles around that deployment? The other couple of areas that we really want to focus on, one is helping develop formal AI security standards, right? Working with the standards development organizations. NSA has long been involved in the standards around encryption. We work very closely with NIST on encryption standards and some other spaces, so we'll be working on that. And then the other area where we kind of see this nexus between our history in cybersecurity and the needs of the AI community is in the area of kind of security evaluation methodology, right? So how do you even have the methodology and the practices and the tools necessary to evaluate cybersecurity risks for an AI system? And it's the challenge really is you've got to protect the whole life cycle. So, for software development, you're kind of in the environment of, providing cybersecurity standards and software development. But for AI, you've got to protect the training data. You've got to protect the training models, the training framework, the models, and then the DevOps of actually machine learning, and then finally deployable systems. So the breadth of the problem, is a lot different than kind of traditional cybersecurity.
So I've been given the 5-minute warning. A lot of audience questions. I'm sorry I can't get to them all, but came up in this morning's panel. I want to get to another topic. Came up in this morning's panel with Deputy Director Cohen and Abadi and others. How is your organization, since voting infrastructure is critical infrastructure, how is your organization contributing to this sort of whole of government, I kind of roll my eyes when I hear that, but whole of government effort on election security? And what will we do now, between now and election day? We're about 67, 68 days out. Is there anything on your schedule in terms of election security? Is there nothing on your schedule? We'll start with Aaron. We'll start with you and we'll work our way back down this way.
Yeah, sure. So not just for elections, but going back to your question of how are we better positioning the world to protect itself, right? And how are we, to Liesel's point, using AI for security? And we are in a position where we have a lot of clean data, and we've trained large language models specifically in security. And we are now providing that, and because we are also in a position from both the Mandiant perspective, Virus Total perspective, and Google perspective, to have unique threat intelligence, we're applying not only automation, but also AI to to be able to operationalize that intelligence, and because we can operate at scale as well, bring in intelligence feeds that customers can bring into their own environment, our intel, and then their other intel feeds, apply that AI to be able to get near real-time threat detections, as well as have the AI generating next steps. Here's what's going on, here's what we're detecting in your system, these are the next steps, and it can even do some of the coding for you, and it offers to do that. Would you like me to implement the response? Because our customers have asked for human oversight to that. At Google, we've been training models and using them for a long time, so a lot of the AI is taking care of the remediation and mitigation in our systems, and now we're even investing in research internally to really build self-healing models to be able to do that self-healing and have those capabilities. But from a customer perspective, what we're providing is the ability to use these AI-enabled SOC operations and capabilities. With respect to elections, more specifically, about 70% of the human population uses Google search. So we want to make sure that the most authoritative information is returned to them, especially for elections. So we're always monitoring and checking and making sure that authoritative information is getting into the hands of the users. So if they're querying information about elections, how do they vote, where do they vote, et cetera, we want to make sure to prioritize the responses that are reliable. We are also looking at how do we equip and protect those at high risk. So whether it's offering the advanced protection programs that we have, or through Mandiant being involved with the proactive services, checking systems, making sure that there's a clean and pristine environment before it's locked down for the elections, and then also providing managed defense, advanced threat hunting capabilities, and robust intel sharing, particularly during these heightened times, to make sure that everybody's aware of the attack types we're seeing and problems, or even maybe addressing things that aren't an attack. That can be equally valuable, so we don't waste our time on things that can be easily mitigated, and sharing that as part of that broader ecosystem. And then last, making sure that we're protecting our own platforms from abuse, and we do use AI for those capabilities. We also watermark, and we look for watermarks, so we're constantly looking to make sure that we're detecting and providing the most reliable information. We have content labels to help users understand what they're seeing and get a better context around what they're seeing. Also, just the same way, I'm sure if you use Google Chrome, you've probably encountered a search where you couldn't access the website, or you had a warning that said, this website is not trusted and we don't recommend that you continue to go there. Well, we're able to provide those warnings because we have all that data that shows, oh, these are probably malicious websites. And we provide that same kind of detection and alert capabilities in a wide variety of ways, not just there, so that users can have better protection and know more about what they're engaging with or about to click on. And the last one is really advancing those AI tools and providing those to you, the user. We have a About This Image tool that you can use, and then within Gemini, you can check and see more about the content that you're looking at. So these are just a wide variety of ways that we've been able to bring technology into the hands of everyday users for their protection as well.
Lisa and then David.
I'll be really quick because, I mean, there's so much with regard to the sanctity of elections. It's not just about cybersecurity. It's dis and misinformation. It's manipulation. It's, not just cyber aspects of it. So there's, it's a very complicated question to deal with. But from the stage point, and CIS is not here, so I'll call them out because they could have talked about it in more depth with regard to our elections.
Yes.
Our role is to just make sure we're emphasizing that elections play an important, a key, vital role in a fair and democratic society. That we have made it clear to our foreign adversaries that we will not tolerate interference in our elections. We certainly have attributed in the past when there has been interference in our elections, and we have supported others, like the UK recently, who have talked about interference in their democratic processes. It's part of the cyber diplomacy and engagement with foreign partners and adversaries that we do on a regular basis. But we are part of the whole of government approach, so it's not just one tactic.
David, last word.
Okay, so you earlier, Martin, described us as the away team and CISA and FBI as the home team, and that definitely applies in the case of election security. So we first of all, it's a very top priority. It's very much a top priority for the National Security Agency. We play a supporting cast member role in it, and we've established, again, as we have since 2018, a joint election security group with U.S. Cyber Command. And so that group is focused on foreign actors, both foreign actors that would try to use malign influence to influence the election or conduct actual interference, hacking operations, targeting election systems. And so we're very much focused overseas at all the foreign threats that might go after U.S. elections. And then our role is really then to tip and support our colleagues at CISA and FBI as they work with state and local governments to deal with any kind of threats that emerge. Don't worry in the sense of prioritization. We're very focused on this, and we'll keep a watchful eye on all the adversaries.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think that's about time. So if everyone would just join me in a round of applause for our speakers. Thank you very much. Thank you.